It is Erick Erickson here. Glad to have you with me. The Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers came out this morning. Oh, yeah. Have y'all seen these? Let's focus on happy news first. How about this? Let's focus on some happy news. The 2021 football season will officially begin September 9th with the Buccaneers and Tom Brady going to the Dallas Cowboys. Week 1 matchups were revealed this morning, while the rest of the schedule is going to be announced tonight. The season includes each team playing 17 regular season games and 3 preseason games, a change approved by owners. And other notable Week 1 matchups: the Chicago Bears will visit the Los Angeles Rams in the season's first Sunday night game. The Panthers quarterback Sam Darnold will face his former team when Carolina hosts the New York Jets, and Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs will host the Cleveland Browns. The Baltimore Ravens will visit the Raiders for the season's first Monday night showcase. Other Week 1 highlights include the Bills at the Steelers and the Packers at the Saints. But will Aaron Rodgers be with Packers? Time will tell. Philip, I think we may need to go to a Raiders game and go to Vegas and see one of these football games. Yes, you will like that, of course. All right, now we'll get to the bad news. We got the good news of football is coming back. Now let's get to the bad news. We have the Bureau of Labor Statistics report out. Here are 2 quotes. The index for all items, excluding food and energy, rose 0.9% in April. Now, that sounds like no big deal. 0.9% in April? Let me put it in perspective for you. It's the largest monthly increase since April of 1982, when the Reagan administration was doing everything they could to rein in the Carter-era runaway inflation. But wait, there's more. The index for used cars and trucks rose 10% in April. It's the largest 1-month increase since it's been tracked since 1953. The largest 1-month increase in used cars and trucks on record ever. That's not good. Now, the Biden administration is telling us not to worry about it, that this is just a passing thing. But is it? I mean, Larry Summers, the left-wing economist, wrote, I read you guys this back in January, that what was going to happen was going to be too much money in the economy, and that was going to cause all sorts of problems. I told you guys this, and everybody dismissed it. People on the left dismissed Larry Summers. They said, no, it's no big deal. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine. It doesn't look like it's going to be fine. Does not at all look like it's going to be fine. We're having labor shortages. We're having problems. We got Jen Psaki in the White House saying that it's going to be transitory. It's just going to be passing through. No big deal. Don't worry about it. And so let's see. Let's recap. We got tensions rising in the Middle East. We've got fuel shortages and gas lines. We've got inflation. We've got Jimmy Carter 2.0. We have Jimmy Carter 2.0. You know that picture of Rosalind Carter and Joe Biden? It looked like she was the mannequin. Maybe it was her. Maybe it was her holding Joe, and Joe's actually the mannequin, and Carter's back in charge. This is not good, nor is it sustainable. It's going to cause all sorts of problems. That gets us to the pipeline. Here's Larry Kudlow.
Gasoline prices are up about 12 cents in the last week. That's according to AAA. They're the best on that. I think the big issue here with Continental is this is the ransomware. They're the ones who were cyber hacked. If Continental can't get back into business by Friday, experts tell me all bloody hell is going to break loose. You're talking about the electric grid. You're talking about no supplies in the gasoline stations. You could also be talking about schools and banks and law firms and office buildings. They basically have until Friday. We don't know much from Colonial. It's kind of an old style utility in pipeline country, and they ain't saying much.
They ain't saying much. Yeah, they're not. Now, listen. The Biden administration position on the Continental Pipeline situation or Colonial Pipeline situation is that it's a private company. Private companies have to make private business decisions. You and I should actually appreciate the restraint of the Biden administration in that regard, because we should not want the federal government intervening in these sorts of decisions for private companies. Private companies have to get their IT infrastructure sound so that they can't be hacked. Private companies need to do things in ways that if the government were to get involved, it would make it worse for all of us. We should not want the government involved. We should thank them for exercising some restraint. But when George W. Bush became president in 2001, at a fractious period in American history, where he won the Electoral College, he lost the popular vote. Shortly thereafter, an American reconnaissance plane was flying up the coast of China. Chinese military fighter jets forced them to land. They did not ditch the plane in the ocean. They decided to land. They tried to hack and destroy all the sensitive intelligence equipment in the plane as they were landing so that the Chinese couldn't get their hands on it. There was questions as to whether or not they did it successfully, whether or not China was able to steal information and data and capabilities from the plane. It was a test of the Bush administration's resolve. It was a test of their diplomacy, and it was a test for the world to watch. How will Bush respond in a crisis like this? Now, a private sector American company responsible for the flow of 45% of petroleum up the eastern seaboard has been hacked by a gang called DarkSide with known ties to the Russian government intelligence operation. The Russians say they had nothing to do with it, but the Russians still deny interfering in the 2016 presidential election when we know they were sowing discord on both sides. It wasn't trying to get Trump elected. It was sowing discord on both sides. We know they tried to interfere in the election to disrupt both sides. They still deny that. They're denying this. Why should we believe them? Yes, it is a private company. The Biden administration should exercise restraint in forcing a private company to do things or taking matters into their own hands. But it is a private company that controls 45% of the fuel supply for the eastern seaboard. It affects our national security. It affects our economy. It affects the eastern United States. It affects school buses. It affects police cars. It affects companies. It affects individuals. The world is watching. It's good that the first instinct of the Biden administration was private companies show some restraint. But now we've got fuel scarcity in the southeast United States. You can say, well, it's people grabbing gas. It's people overfilling. This picture's gone viral of people filling up gas tanks. Incidentally, I saw that picture, and I've had it attributed to people in Dahlonega, Georgia, Athens, Georgia, Monticello, Georgia, McDonough, Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia. Everyone says, I saw these people doing it, and it's from all over the place. Who knows if it actually happened? But the picture's gone viral. I assume it actually did happen. People with these giant gas containers filling it up. Who knows if it was real or not? But we've got the price of corn is up 50% from last year. Lumber prices are 4 times higher than they were. Companies are short-staffed, they're forced to raise wages, and they still can't compete against a government-subsidized unemployment check. And now you've got fuel scarcity in the southeast and the eastern seaboard, all the way to New York. At some point, the Biden administration needs to be less restrained in dealing with this. Again, the world is watching. How is he going to respond to this? And by the way, this time they did it to a fuel pipeline. They say, we would never do it to hospitals. China and Russia would. Maybe the gang wouldn't. What about a nuclear power plant? What about a water supply? We've already seen water supplies being hacked. The private sector needs to get its butt in gear and stop letting people use password 123 as their password. Start updating to new systems. Maybe move to Apple and get away from Windows, since Windows is so readily, easily hackable by everybody. Maybe disconnect stuff from the internet and stop being so reliant on the internet. Build your own internal communications networks so that outside entities can't hack into you. You know, I suspect there is an opportunity for an American company to help companies build internal operations that are not reliant on the internet. I suspect that's going to be the next thing. That's going to be the next wave of technology. And in some cases, they already have it. They're already deploying it. But I mean, you're going to have to. If someone from Russia or Hungary or Budapest or in Hungary or Bulgaria or somewhere can hack in across the internet into a private company and disrupt 45% of the fuel flow of the eastern seaboard of the United States, we got problems. And it's probably now is a good time for there to be controls put in place for hospitals and power companies and fuel supply companies and other private sector companies that have a direct impact on national security to be off the main internet and have internal internets. You know, they're back in the day, Apple had this system. Now I forget what it was called. Apple Talk is what it was called, where you could essentially create an internet in your company by stringing lines between computers and a server that was never actually connected to the outside world. Use microwave dishes to connect different portals of the company together. There are ways to do this. And we probably as a country need to start having conversations about doing stuff like this. But concurrent to all of it, the Biden administration, good job exercising restraint. Now, though, you may have to figure something out. Colonial Pipeline says they will be able to figure out this afternoon whether or not they can turn back on their power, whether or not they can turn back on their fuel pipeline. They'll know late this afternoon at the latest whether or not it is possible. This, by the way, is the first time that they've ever shut it down. So they got to make sure it's safe to turn it back on and that they've got the technical capability to do so. If they can, crisis averted to a degree, except remember, we've also got a tank driver shortage. So we don't have enough fuel truck drivers to be able to drive fuel trucks right now. And now this puts us further behind, thanks to the Joe Biden, almost said Obama, the Biden subsidy of unemployment. We got problems. Inflation's on the rise. This is going to add to it. The Biden administration better come up with a game plan. If Colonial can't get this done this afternoon, the government is going to have to find a way to get involved to make this happen. And you know, the irony here is that they don't want to build any more pipelines. I mean, this is one way. If you want to think of this as jujitsu, these hackers knew where our weak point was. The Biden administration doesn't want to do more pipelines. They're anti-fossil fuel to begin with. So go after the fossil fuel pipelines. And what's the Biden administration going to do? They've already canceled the Keystone XL pipeline. They don't want any further pipelines within the infrastructure. They don't want us using fossil fuel. So you disrupt the fossil fuel, and the Biden administration is going to be hard-pressed to care anyway, which is exactly what they did. They're predictable. Here's Ron DeSantis.
This is something that's a very serious attack on critical infrastructure in our country. This pipeline actually doesn't touch Florida, but it does feed into many of our gas stations. So we've declared a state of emergency. We're lifting restrictions to be able to get more fuel into pumps. But the Biden administration needs to take this seriously. Their initial response is, oh, this is a private pipeline, and just shrug your shoulders. This is important infrastructure for our country, and it could impact our economy greatly if they don't respond.
Yeah, you're going to have to do something. By the way, as we had a commercial break, some news here. Liz Cheney, by a voice vote, has just been removed from Republican leadership.
You can follow Erick around social media.
Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. This wasn't in my show notes to get to, but it just happened. The FCC has just authorized expansion of internet access due to the homework gap. There are 17 million students on the losing end of the digital divide living in rural areas, with school districts refusing to go back into school and using Zoom classroom. Congressional Democrats want an additional $7 billion for the E-rate program. It's a broadband fund for eligible schools and libraries administered by the FEC. Essentially, what it would do is expand in rural areas access to areas where libraries and local schools in rural areas are, and get them prioritized high-speed internet access. The FCC has agreed that homeschool students should be eligible, and where there are homeschool cooperatives in rural parts of the country, they too will be able to apply. You know, a lot of homeschool students don't necessarily work at home. They go to a common location. Like there's a church near us where a lot of homeschool kids get together to do their work together, and a parent comes in and goes through a class with them. The parent is an expert in that particular class and comes in and teaches, and it's not a real school setting, but it's a location where all of them go, and those locations will be eligible for this high-speed internet funding as well. The Democrats on the FCC decided to go along with it. Good for them. Good for them. Andy Puzder, who's been on this program before, the CEO of Carl's and Hardee's, has a great piece up at Fox News. Post-COVID, no action from Biden. Dems was required for job market to soar. Let me read some of this to you. There's a simple rule in economics. You do more business when you're open than when you're closed. Ba-bumch. Applying the rule to today's economy, you will do more business in a year when you are coming out of a pandemic and opening up the economy than you did in a year when you were going into a pandemic and shutting down the economy. So, all that President Biden and his Democratic allies had to do for the jobs market to take off at or near historic levels was do nothing. Stupid. But unfortunately, the temptation was too great. As just about anyone in America who has been to a local business knows, people are staying home because they can make more money sitting on the couch than working, thanks to Democrats' extremely generous unemployment benefits, which include a $300 a week federal jobless bonus on top of traditional state unemployment benefits with no requirement to apply for work. Originally passed during the pandemic on a bipartisan basis as a temporary measure when jobs were in short supply, those benefits expired December 31st. In March, without a single Republican vote in the House or Senate, Democrats extended them to September. The jobs market reacted immediately. While the economy created an average of over 500,000 jobs from January through March, that number dropped precipitously to 266,000 in April, and the unemployment rate increased to 6.1%. No one should have been surprised. You know, have you noticed that the left seems to forget basic economics? When you subsidize something, you get more of that. So when you subsidize unemployment, you get more unemployment. You want to subsidize employment, you reduce employer-side taxes and burdens and regulations, and you get more of it. It's kind of silly to watch the Biden administration in full denial about what's going on out there. We're getting the Jimmy Carter economy. We've got a crime wave like the 1970s. We've got gas lines like the 1970s. We've got inflation like the 1970s. We've got Middle Eastern calamities like the 1970s. I mean, the one thing Carter was able to do was bring peace between Egypt and Israel at the time, but otherwise the Middle East was chaotic at the time as well. We got a new Cold War on the rise with China this time, not Russia. We've got the Jimmy Carter economy with Joe Biden. And by the way, the kids who run Twitter want you to know Jimmy Carter was a great president. No one who ever paid attention actually thought about that. Now, speaking of the Israel situation, we need to spend some time on the Israel situation. I want to walk you through what's actually happening in the Middle East. We'll do a little bit of a deep dive in history, because you do need to understand where this comes from, what the foundational background is, but also the here and now. I don't know if you've seen the Iron Dome videos. They're super impressive. I mean, I just, it's like something out of the Avengers or something. I was deeply impressed with watching the videos of the Iron Dome working, but the Palestinians are firing so much they're overwhelmed.
10.
Howdy, how are you? It is Erick Erickson here. The phone lines are open. 877-97-ERIC. 877-973-7425. Should you wish to be a part of this here program, you are allowed to do so. Let's do a bit of a dive into the Israeli situation, just so everybody can understand the full context of this. I want to give you a history lesson. Now, I gotta pull back up a note I had written a little while ago to, I wanted to get the date. 135 AD. So let's go in the Wayback Machine, and we're talking back thousands of years. There were in the land of Canaan various tribes. There were Philistines and Canaanites, Ammonites and Moabites and Edomites and all those. They had various tribal regions. And the Israelites moved from Egypt into what was considered the promised land in the Bible, into Canaan, and they took over the area thousands of years ago. After Solomon, it broke into two pieces, Judah and Israel. Israel over time began to be referred to as Samaria. If you the Good Samaritan is from Samaria. That was the northern kingdom area. The northern kingdom collapsed first, and gosh, when I was in seminary, I had to memorize the dates, and now I've forgotten them. The northern kingdom collapsed first, absorbed into the Syrian Babylonian Empire. Then the Judah collapsed, eventually becoming it's part of the Persian Empire. This territory. Cyrus allows them to come back and start rebuilding the temple. Over time, Alexander invades and creates his empire, the first of the major empires that stretch across the Western world. He dies. His empire is broken up into pieces. Judah is just a pawn in the war between the various leaders. Eventually, the Romans take it over, and it is called Judea. But the Jews are a very particular people, and the Romans had to grant them a great deal of autonomy because the Jews were willing to die for their God, and the Romans knew it. And so the Jews were given special exemptions in religious worship. They did not have to embrace the Roman gods. There was a Roman proconsul. Pilate was one of those. And ultimately, due to a series of rebellious actions, the Romans surrounded it, destroyed the temple in AD 70, and a lot of people fled. Well, they didn't really wipe it out, though. They became troublesome for the Roman emperors. And when Hadrian, who built Hadrian's Wall, became emperor, there was yet again another revolt, and he decided enough was enough. So in 135 AD, Hadrian changed the name of Judea to something you may have heard of, Palestine, Syria Palestinia. It became referred to as Palestine. And those people who lived there, he threw all the Jews out of their territory. All the Jews were forced to go away, and the people who were allowed to take up residence were called Palestinians. And the name has stuck ever since. There is no historic dispute that it was Israel, the northern and southern kingdom, Judah, Judea, Samaria. They were the territory of Israel, and that's where the Jews lived. The Jews have had the hardest life of any ethnic group on planet Earth, repeatedly persecuted around the world, spread across the world as well, ruthlessly exterminated by the Nazis. After the Roman Empire fell, it became part of the Byzantine Empire and then the Ottoman Empire. Jews slowly over time began trickling back into the area, and after World War II, really wanted to reestablish a territory for themselves. Through various wars and the like, the Jews have expanded the territory of Israel, now Israelis and not Jews. The Palestinians claim some level of ownership here, but you've got to understand that historically, this has been the kingdom of Israel, this territory. So when the left refers to Palestine, they are embracing the Roman persecution of the Jews. When they say Palestine, Palestinians were not a thing until the Romans threw them out, threw the Jews out. By force, no less. And by force, continuously, the Jews have been thrown out. You can tell there's got to be something about the Jewish people and the Christian people, given how the world persecutes them. The things of the world hate the things of God. We're now at another conflict between Palestinians and Jews. Israel has been expanding its territory, and in expanding its territory, has moved into two areas, Gaza and the West Bank. Gaza is a strip of land along the Mediterranean headed towards Egypt. The West Bank is territory on the western side of the River Jordan. A lot of international groups have disputed ownership of that, have disputed Israel's ownership over time. The United States and others have largely acquiesced to the spread of Israel into parts of the West Bank, expanding settlements there. Jerusalem has been the undisputed capital for the Israeli people since King David, because supposedly Muhammad appeared in a vision on where the Dome of the Rock is, where the temple is. The Muslims built the Al-Aqsa Mosque there with the gold dome. They claim some connection to Muhammad there because of a dream or some such, but that's where the temple was built. That's where God dwelt among the Jewish people. There's no historic dispute to any of this. Over time, the Palestinians who allied with the Soviets during the Cold War built up a base of support among the left around the world. And there is a great deal of solidarity between left-wing Americans and the Palestinians who buy their persecution narrative. Now, here's something you need to understand. Palestinians were by and large pushed into surrounding countries as the Jews expanded, as the Israelis now I should say, expanded Israeli territory during the various wars with Arab nations. Those Arab nations, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the like, they treated the Palestinians worse than the Israelis ever did. And they needed a uniting grievance to unite various tribal factions within those own countries, and so Israel became the big bad guy. Now, over time, Israel has established peaceful relationships with Jordan and Egypt, and now with the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Oman, Somalia. I think Algeria and Tunisia now have come on board. And the Palestinians are upset about that peace. They are upset about these countries having peaceful relations with Israel, and they're working to undermine the peace accords that Donald Trump was able to negotiate between these countries and Israel. And one way to do that is to make themselves seem more like victims. This leads to the present situation. This is the Ramadan period. Ramadan is a period of fasting during the day. Then you have celebrations at night. And there is a territory within Jerusalem that Israeli courts, which have, by the way, been very sympathetic to the Palestinian people, declared this particular territory to be Israeli territory and allowed settlement of Israelis in this area. And the Palestinians have been congregating outside a gate. I think it's the Damascus Gate. I think, don't hold me to that. And they've been, during Ramadan, the Israelis told them to stop congregating there because there's been spillover violence into this neighborhood where Israelis are moving in. And it set off conflicts where Hamas began firing rockets. Now, What you don't get in this country is that on a daily basis, Hamas tends to fire rockets into Israel. In the last few days, it's been about 700 rockets. This isn't anything new. This happens. But they've escalated now, and part of the reason that they've escalated this is because there are elections that are going on within the Palestinian territory, and Hamas is vying for more power, and they need the Palestinians to back them by showing they're the big bad who can take on Israel because they're desperate to win some elections. The Palestinian leader, what is it, Abbas, had wanted to have the elections. That it looks like the elections are on, and the Hamas wants more power. Hamas is a terrorist group, but also has a political wing, kind of like the IRA did. On top of that, you've got all of this willful agitation to try to break up the peace agreements with the UAE and Bahrain and Egypt and Jordan and the other countries that have sided with Israel. And so they've got to generate some international outrage. Now, much of the American and international media is sympathetic to the Palestinians, in large part because they are of the left. You do have to understand that the Palestinians, since the Cold War and the Soviet Union, have embedded themselves and their cause within the hearts and minds of the left. Socialists around the world have loved them because Israel sided with the United States and is capitalist. So Palestinians are always the victim, pay no attention to the daily rocket barrage on Israel. The Palestinians are always portrayed as the victim. There is a massive PR campaign on behalf of Palestinians around the world with left-wing organizations and left-wing media outlets. The fact of the matter is, Israel is not on a regular basis firing rockets into Palestinian territory. It's Palestinians on a daily basis firing rockets into Israeli territory. Give you an example of the PR campaign that's out there with the left. Israelis, it is Jerusalem Day also in Israel. It's a big celebration, the uniting of Jerusalem. They celebrate it. Hamas dared to tell Israel not to celebrate it this year. They went ahead and celebrated it. That was the next provoking event. Hamas, a terrorist group, tries to tell Israel, don't celebrate a national holiday this year because we're going to be offended. They celebrate it. It's during Ramadan right now. That's why Hamas didn't want them to celebrate it. So they do it anyway. So Hamas starts firing rockets. Well, the Israelis are having this celebration of Jerusalem Day. They're at the Wailing Wall, as close as they can get to the Solomonic Temple, where now the Dome of the Rock is, and a tree gets caught on fire by fireworks. International members of the press, blue check marks, say, look, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Gold Dome, is on fire, and the Israelis are chanting as it burns. That went viral on the internet, but it wasn't the mosque. It was a tree that fireworks got set on fire. Too late, damage done. Hamas begins a volley of rocket attacks and escalates the war. As I'm sitting here talking, the Associated Press has just released an alert on this situation. Hamas says an Israeli airstrike killed its Gaza City commander, the highest ranking militant to be killed since the 2014 war between them. Militant group Hamas confirmed its Gaza City commander was killed. Bassem Issa was the highest ranking military figure in Hamas to be killed by Israel since the 2014 war in Gaza. In a statement, the armed wing of Hamas said Issa was killed along with a few of his fellow brothers of leaders and holy fighters during the fighting that's been going on for 2 days in Gaza. The Israelis have a Western capable military. Every man, woman, and child in Israel joins the military at some point, I guess when they're 18. They take their defense very seriously. They are surrounded by terrorist groups that do not recognize their legitimacy. Those terrorist groups are backed by countries like Iran that declared death to Israel and America. What are they going to do? It's their territory. They don't care that the American military or the American media is deeply sympathetic to the Palestinians. The history is this has been, since time immemorial, Jewish territory until Hadrian threw them all out and designated it Palestine. And the different people who floated in and settled down over time became Palestinians. The Jews spread through the world and eventually came back home to a land given to them by God himself. And it doesn't matter that the world doesn't like it. That's their territory. They've got historic archaeological claims to it. We don't call the people who live there Canaanites. They're Palestinians, a word given to them by a Roman emperor who first began to ruthlessly persecute the Jews. If you got to pick a side on this, you pick the Israeli side. It's a no-brainer against terrorists like Hamas. The Israelis don't have clean hands in some of this, to be fair. But by and large, what's going on here is agitation by Hamas, seizing this moment and this opportunity to try to destabilize peace between various Middle Eastern countries and Israel that have had peace. This is a pressure campaign on them, and the American media is willfully being used as a pawn by Hamas to try to break out war in the Middle East, all to get rid of Donald Trump's legacy and destabilize Israel, which is what the media always likes to do when it comes to Israel.
Well connected and well respected. It's Erick Erickson.
Hello there. It is Erick Erickson here. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Well, she's got words about Andrew Yang. Wait till you hear why. But first, this hour of the program, it is sponsored by First Liberty Building and Loan. FirstLibertyGA.com is their website. If you're in charge of the financial decisions of a business and you need access to loan credit, you need some comprehensive lending decisions made to get you access to capital, go to First Liberty Building and Loan. They're in Noonan, Georgia, but they can help you anywhere in the nation. First Liberty Building and Loan, their website, First Liberty GA, get you all their contact information. You spend 5 minutes with First Liberty, see if they're a good fit for you. They do six-figure loans and higher. They don't do small transactions. They do big stuff, and they want to help you get big. FirstLibertyGA.com. Thanks to them for their sponsorship. And so Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she's upset with Andrew Yang. Why? Because he supported the Israeli airstrikes. I told you the socialists love the Palestinians, and it goes back to the Cold War days when the Palestinians sided with the Soviet Union, and there have always been since then historic ties between socialists and the Palestinians. A Muslim community group in Queens disinvited Andrew Yang from a Ramadan event on Tuesday, and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez harangued him over social media amid mounting outrage over the mayoral hopeful's public support for Israel's deadly airstrikes on Palestinians this week. Notice the New York Daily News does not talk about the Palestinian deadly strikes on Israelis. Yang, the frontrunner in the crowded race to replace Mayor Bill de Blasio, was supposed to help distribute groceries to Muslim families in need at the Astoria Welfare Society on Tuesday afternoon, but he told reporters event organizers informed him last minute it would be better if he did not attend. We are happy to abide by their wishes, Yang said, adding he believes the organizers asked him to stay away over a Monday tweet in which he said he's standing with the people of Israel after its military conducted airstrikes that left at least 28 Palestinians dead, including 9 children and a woman. Notice, again, the New York Daily News does not talk about the women and children in Israel killed by the Palestinians. Ocasio-Cortez, who has yet to offer an endorsement in the mayoral race, was flabbergasted that Yang thought he'd be welcomed at the Astoria Welfare Society. Utterly shameful for Yang to try to show up to an Eid event after sending out a chest-thumping statement of support for a strike, killing 9 children, tweeted Ocasio-Cortez, one of the most influential progressives in Congress. But then to try that in Astoria during Ramadan, they will let you know. Oh, wait, here, buried down at the bottom, Israel's military began conducting airstrikes in Palestinian Gaza on Monday after Hamas, an Islamist militant group that controls the area, fired rockets at Jerusalem, killing at least 2 Israelis. Hamas attacked in retaliation for Israeli security forces using increasingly heavy-handed police tactics to crack down on Palestinian unrest in several cities across the region in recent weeks. Especially violent clashes have unfolded near and even inside Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site for Muslims, when cops fired rubber bullets, tear gas, and stun grenades, wounding hundreds. Now, why? Well, because the Israeli Supreme Court, which, by the way, has been a fairly level-headed, even-handed court, said that Israeli citizens were allowed to move into an area the Palestinians said was theirs, showing no historic proof for the Palestinians to claim it as their own. And the Palestinians began rioting, and the Israeli police used sandbags and rubber bullets to tamp down on the rioters. So Hamas fires rockets, killing Israelis. So Israel responds. So Hamas responds. So Israel responds. So Hamas responds. So Israel responds. Israel's got more weapons and has deep intelligence with inside Gaza to be able to do more damage. But keep in mind here, this is the thing you've got to understand. The Palestinians and Hamas don't care about inflicting maximum damage on Israel. They care about maximum PR in the American and Western press. And the American and Western press, so overrun with leftists, do not care about Israel, despise Israel, love the Palestinians, and will give them all the positive coverage possible. It is a massive propaganda campaign, much like you see China doing in this country, again, with the same leftist media entities. Very hard to figure out what's true with this stuff when you listen to the mainstream media. Greetings, welcome, glad to have you with me. It is Erick Erickson here all across the place these days. It is rainy where I am. I hope it's fine where you are. It's kind of gross outside. You know, so it's going to be cold again where I'm down in middle Georgia. And I gotta, we can all laugh at this together because, you know, Southerners and their humor about this. So it's going to be, today is Wednesday, tomorrow, 68 for a high and 48 for a low, down to 46 on Friday where I am. Winter returns to middle Georgia. It'll be great weather for sitting on the front porch for bourbon and cigars on Sunday night. I'm just, the weather where I am is just nuts right now. And the pollen, of course, is coming back. All right, enough about me and where I am. Liz Cheney has been booted out. The daughter of the former vice president of the United States, Republican vice president of the United States, arguably the most conservative vice president we've had until Mike Pence, has been booted from Republican leadership by a voice vote. It didn't exactly go as you might have expected. Ken Buck, for example, one of the House Freedom Caucus members, says he supported Cheney. One of the big fights to come now is that the Republican leadership wants to replace her with Elise Stefanik, and Stefanik actually more often opposed Donald Trump's agenda than Liz Cheney did. Liz Cheney was more likely to vote for things Donald Trump wanted than Elise Stefanik was. And yet the Republican leaders want to now replace Liz Cheney with Elise Stefanik. That makes no sense. Meanwhile, the New York Times has this: over 100 Republicans, including former officials, threaten to split from GOP. More than 100 Republicans, including some former elected officials, are preparing to release a letter this week threatening to form a third party if the Republican Party does not make certain changes, according to an organizer of the effort. The statement is expected to take aim at former President Donald Trump's stranglehold on Republicans, which signatories to the document have deemed unconscionable. When in our democratic republic, forces of conspiracy, division, and despotism arise, it is the patriotic duty of citizens to act collectively in defense of liberty and justice, reads the preamble. Oh, good Lord, they have a preamble. How pretentious do these people think? It's Miles Taylor. Miles Taylor. Remember, Miles Taylor was anonymous. They blame Victoria Coates, who worked in the National Security Council, but it was Miles Taylor who had been working for the Department of Homeland Security as a chief of staff to Kristen Nielsen. He wrote the anonymous op-ed in the New York Times and then the anonymous book. And he's joined with Christy Todd Whitman and Tom Ridge, former Transportation Secretary Mary Peters, Charlie Dent, Barbara Comstock, Reed Ribble, Mickey Edwards of Oklahoma. Some of these people I know, some of them. Who is Mary Peters? Let's see. Mary Peters. She was the Secretary of Transportation under George W. Bush from 2006 to 2009. I had no idea this woman existed. I have no idea. My goodness. Okay. Gosh. All right. Mary married Terry Peters, a Marine, at age 17. She and Terry have 3 children together. In 2013, Terry was convicted of sexually abusing a 7-year-old girl and was sentenced to 14 years in prison. Goodness gracious, that's tragic. I don't know anything about. I do not have any. There's not a brain cell in my head who recalls her replacing Ray LaHood, who had been Secretary of Transportation, but she's apparently one of the people who says she's out. But let me give you, you got Charlie Dent, not a conservative. Reed Ribble, not really a conservative. Mickey Edwards of Oklahoma wasn't really a conservative. Barbara Comstock was and is, but more moderate than most conservatives these days. But Christy Todd Whitman and Tom Ridge, not exactly conservative. I'm pulling up the Mickey Edwards biography. He got elected in 1974. How old is the man? He's 83 years old. And he was a squishy Republican, a dissident Republican, critical of Republican office holders over time. He's written all sorts of things critical of Republicans over time. Oh, he was Chris Shays. Oh, he attacked George W. Bush for constitutional abuses. Yeah, so he's squishy. All right. I would like a word with all of you, please. I actually know and like Liz Cheney. It's kind of funny. Ken Buck, House Freedom Caucus member, stood up for Liz Cheney. They both came to my 2009 Red State gathering in Atlanta, the very first one we did. Cheney, though, has divided her caucus. She's actually united her caucus against her by and large for her outspokenness about the election and the aftermath of the election. And if she's the message bearer, the unity bringer for the GOP in the House, she probably doesn't need to be in that position. I like her. I largely agree with her on what she's saying, but I also think the Republican Party needs to be forward-looking, and she is very dogmatic at this point and insisting they have to renounce Donald Trump to move forward, and that puts them outside of where the base of the party is. And I don't think it's practical for the GOP to do it. Regardless of where you stand on Liz Cheney, though, I think we need a real assessment of what's going on in the media here. This comes on the same day 100 Republicans say they're going to leave the GOP and start a new party. Many of them have not been meaningfully part of the Republican Party in a while. Many of them are in their 80s and older. Some of them you've never heard of. Some of them have an inflated sense of self-importance. But uniformly, they're socially liberal. And this is the thing that bothers me most about the way the media is covering contretemps within the Republican Party, the intra-party fighting within the GOP. You have a bunch of liberals in the news media who don't like conservatives. They've never liked conservatives. They're uniformly socially liberal, but they shape the commentary in the front page of the news. And so they make these matters of, for example, Liz Cheney to be of monumental importance when they're really not. It's an intra-party position that's a rather meaningless position to begin with, if we're frank. But they elevate it into something more than it is to try to name and shame the GOP, and then they give legitimacy to these groups. Again, let me go to this New York Times story. The headline: over 100 Republicans, including former officials, threatened to split from the GOP. The common denominator of all of them is not that they hate Donald Trump. It's that they're pro-abortion social liberals. They've never fit in the Republican Party anyway. Christy Todd Whitman couldn't run for president back in the day, even though she wanted to. Same with Tom Ridge. Why? Because they're pro-abortion social liberals. When you look at the Never Trump Brigade, what you find is that overwhelmingly those who stayed Never Trump and dug their heels in are social liberals who are pro-abortion. It's easy for them to drift off to a new party or the Democratic Party because they don't mind if kids are murdered. For those of us who actually care about a culture of life, where do you go? You stay with the GOP and, in fact, recognize Donald Trump was a very pro-life president. When social conservatism doesn't matter to you, it makes it very easy for you to make decisions like this. And when the majority of the media doesn't care about the issue, it makes it very easy for the media to paint you as the noble warrior and the hero. Now, this gets us back to Liz Cheney. The reason the media has played up the fight within the Republican Party and Liz Cheney is because they don't like the Republicans. So here comes a split. They don't like Donald Trump. Liz Cheney is on the opposite side of Donald Trump. And so people who would not pee on Liz Cheney if she were on fire will make her Joan of Arc to vilify the Republican Party. And it has nothing to do with Liz Cheney's positions, because overwhelmingly, Liz Cheney's more conservative than Elise Stefanik, and they can't stand Liz Cheney's positions. They do not like Liz Cheney supporting tax cuts. They do not like Liz Cheney's cultural conservatism. They do not like Liz Cheney backing border funding. They do not like Liz Cheney backing a robust national defense. They do not like Liz Cheney voting in opposition to Democratic measures in Congress. They don't like any of that stuff, but she's convenient for them right now to build up as a hero so that they can further vilify the Republican Party because they don't like the Republicans. They don't like conservatives. There is a bias in the national media against conservatives. And by the way, Donald Trump has nothing to do with it. The bias existed before them, but now the media has gotten to a point where it doesn't tell us what's happening in the world anymore. It tells us stories. And every story has a protagonist and every story has an antagonist, and they can make Donald Trump the antagonist because it's easier to vilify one man and his followers than a group of people who are socially conservative, because most of America tends to be culturally, socially conservative. And you can't vilify all of America, so you make it about Donald Trump and you try to make him bad and say, oh, anyone who likes that guy, they're terrible people. You can't be like those people. Come vote for us. Pay no attention to our positions. That's actually what's happening here. Liz Cheney will be a bad guy for them again. When she stands up in opposition to H.R. 1, when she stands up in opposition to tax increases, when she stands up in opposition to the wokes, when she stands up in opposition to cancel culture. It's ironic they're calling it cancel culture. No, they're not canceling her. They're just moving her out of a position. But she'll again be the bad guy. Liz Cheney will be vilified by the press before this year ends because of her actual positions. But right now it's convenient for the media to make her a martyr, to further make it all about Donald Trump. They can't let Trump go. They've tried with Tucker Carlson. They're about to turn on Ron DeSantis and make Ron DeSantis the Trump 2.0, which will actually be good for DeSantis. But the media's got to have an antagonist, and the antagonist is Donald Trump and anyone who supports Donald Trump. They can't talk about conservatives. Like these people who are departing the GOP, they haven't meaningfully been part of a Republican coalition. Who the hell is Miles Taylor? None of you know who Miles Taylor is. None of you know who Mickey Edwards is from Oklahoma, or this former Secretary of Transportation. What's her name? Yeah, I can't even remember her name now. Mary Peters. You may have heard of Christy Todd Whitman because she was a governor, or Tom Ridge because he was a governor and the Homeland Security Secretary during 9/11. You may have heard of them. Or after 9/11, he became the Homeland Security Secretary. But you don't know any of these people. No, none of you care about these people. But the media cares because, oh, it's happening, the crack up of the GOP. But it's not the crack up of the GOP. Probably none of these people voted for Donald Trump to begin with. And he still won in 2016. But they can highlight this and play up the cracks within the GOP so that they don't have to highlight the divisions within the Democratic Party. They don't have to highlight the social conservatism of the GOP. They can make it about Donald Trump. They can make it about Liz Cheney. They can make it about antagonists and protagonists so that they can leave out what actually is going on behind the scenes. Because if they talk about the positions of the parties, a great many Americans agree with the GOP on these culturally conservative issues, and the media does not. They can't stand it. They disdain it. So better for them to elevate heroes and try to build them up without actually talking about what these people stand for. It is really freaking easy for someone who has no care in the world for the unborn to pack up and leave the GOP and say, hey, you know, the Democrats, I agree with them on all this social stuff. Might as well go with them. When for the rest of us, we're like, no, you know, this is actually killing children. We actually don't like this. It's very easy for those of you who like to kill children or have no problem with it to pack up and suddenly declare yourselves Democrats or a third party. The rest of us actually have moral issues we care about. The amoral and the godless, go on and do your thing. And again, it is not a coincidence that the most vocal, still members of the Never Trump Brigade are a bunch of people who couldn't care less about killing the unborn, with very few exceptions. They're socially liberal. And so they're perfectly fine abandoning the GOP because they never cared about those issues anyway. And by the way, when they prop up a third party, that third party is going to look just like themselves. It'll be just another fiscally liberal, socially liberal party. They'll call themselves the Democraticans, and no one will think twice.
You can follow Erick around social media at EW.
Hello there. It is Erick Erickson. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. By the way, you don't get this a lot out there, but here's a headline: Republican voters more pragmatic than their leaders. In New Mexico, Texas, and Virginia, Republicans have avoided the Trumpiest candidates in favor of more mainstream alternatives. This is from Josh Krashour. In the post-Trump political era, there are different ways to look at the state of the Republican Party. One could focus on the radical grassroots activists conducting asinine audits of election results in Arizona while censuring Republican critics of the president. Or you could scrutinize the party's rank and file in Washington, who are looking to placate the former president and his diehard supporters by throwing Liz Cheney out of leadership, a rash decision by Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, born out of his desire to memory hole the January 6th Capitol riot Trump incited. That Krashour sentence, not mine. Neither would paint a picture of a healthy party. But step back and look at the party's voters, and a more nuanced picture emerges. From the Republican stronghold of Texas to Democratic-leaning Virginia to blue New Mexico Republicans have been rallying behind traditional candidates in the first wave of nominating fights taking place in 2021. All the successful candidates have been supportive of Trump. He's endorsed 2 of them, but have avoided the extreme rhetoric and conspiracy theorizing that defined his presidency. In the Virginia governor's race, Republicans nominated former Carlyle Group CEO Glenn Youngkin, a venture capitalist who holds an establishment-friendly political resume as you could draw up, while he pandered to Trump voters by discussing voter integrity and featuring the former president in an ad. He avoided the type of language that could alienate swing voters in the general. State Senator Amanda Chase, dubbed Trump in heels for her right-wing outbursts, occupied the MAGA lane, winning a sizable 21% of first-choice balloting. Businessman Pete Snyder made overt efforts to woo right-wing voters, counting conservative hardliners like Ken Cuccinelli and Representative Bob Good and Sarah Huckabee Sanders as top surrogates. He finished runner-up to Youngkin, winning 26% of the first round. Youngkin is the prototype of a candidate we'll be seeing a lot of in Republican primary races next year. One-time establishment types adapting their status and style to appeal to working-class Trump voters. A resident of Tonytown of Great Falls who earned $17 million in 2017 and spent $5.9 million of his own money on the nomination, Youngkin is an unlikely avatar for Trump populism. But just a day after winning the nomination, Trump endorsed him while slamming Terry McAuliffe. Last month, Texas Republicans offered their own verdict on the future in the election for Representative Ron Wright, who died from COVID. They advanced his wife, Susan, and State Representative Jake Ellzey to a runoff. Wright's campaign message was similar to her husband's, homing in on the issue of illegal immigration. Trump endorsed Wright. While both Wright and Ellzey were tied at 15.7% in early voting, Wright surged on Election Day while Ellzey sagged to 11%. Trump is still a major factor in endorsements within the GOP. And then there's the race in New Mexico for Interior Secretary Deb Haaland's seat. In the race, local Republican leaders handpicked their nominee, choosing Mark Moores, a Hispanic state senator who was a football star at the University of New Mexico. The district is solidly Democrat. Moore put his Democratic opponent, Melanie Stansbury, on defense by targeting her position on criminal justice amid rising violent crime in Albuquerque. There's one major caveat to the glimmers of GOP pragmatism: Trump himself. In many Senate primaries to come, he threatens to wreak havoc on the party's best-laid plans. Meanwhile, McCarthy's own surrender to Trump and purging Cheney from party leadership is ham-fisted. Maybe so, but the party's going to navigate forward. The media can't let Donald Trump go. Now, there are some members of the Republican base who can't let him go, but overwhelmingly, it's the media can't let Donald Trump go. The media needs Donald Trump. All things must be tied to Donald Trump. He's good for ratings. CNN's viewership is down 2/3 from when Donald Trump was president. They've got to have Trump or someone like Trump to get viewers back. That's why every single road leads to Trump in national press coverage. They are obsessed with him. More on that obsession when we come back. Hi there. It is Erick Erickson here. Delighted to have you with me. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. What? Apparently, I don't sound delighted when I say I'm delighted to have you. I'm delighted to have you with me. Shut up and stop texting me. All right. I mentioned the obsession of the media. Follow along with me while I string a couple of stories together, shall we? By the way, in the next hour, Stephen Gutowski is going to join me. I don't know if you've heard this. The NRA bankruptcy lawsuit has been thrown out of court. They will now be harassed by the New York Attorney General. Stephen Gutowski has been following that at The Reload. He's going to join me to talk about the NRA. Follow along with me here. This is from Politico. I told you that the media is more obsessed than anyone. 17 congressional Republicans supported the second impeachment of former President Donald Trump. Unlike Liz Cheney, most of them want to move on. As Cheney faces ouster from House GOP leadership on Wednesday for continuing to rebut Trump's election lies, other Republicans who deemed him guilty of inciting insurrection on January 6th are taking an approach that largely spares them intra-party retribution. They stand by their anti-Trump votes and oppose Cheney's demotion, but they're focused on strengthening their party's message against Democratic control of Washington. Maine Senator Susan Collins, the only Senate Republican elected from a state Trump lost in 2020, recently escaped censure by her state party for her vote to convict him and has dived into a bipartisan group negotiating on current issues. She said President Biden's proposed expansion of government and the nation's increasing debt are the issues we should be talking about rather than relitigating the election. Getting past Trump hasn't come easy for Cheney, but as much as her fellow Republicans who crossed the former president would prefer to keep their focus on Biden, some recognize their silence runs the risk of ceding Trump more power. Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, who voted to convict, said his House colleagues' Wednesday vote on Cheney is going to be perceived as President Trump dictating the House. The party's top two Senate leaders, Mitch McConnell and John Thune, have basically stopped talking about Trump. And on it goes. You get the point here. What's going on is the media doesn't like it that Republicans have stopped talking about Trump. The media despises that Republicans have stopped talking about Trump. They need the Republicans to talk about Trump because they need the Trump headlines. They need it. Now, why do they need it? Because there's an interesting article across the pond from Tony Blair, the former British Prime Minister. He's writing about the Labour Party in Great Britain, saying Labour will die without total change. The subtitle, the Labour Party needs complete deconstruction and reconstruction. Nothing less will do. But what he's actually writing about is the progressive movement as a whole around the world, including in the United States. And he begins with Joe Biden in the United States. Joe Biden's victory in the United States apart, progressive politics across the globe is badly placed. 4 election defeats for the UK Labour Party, and no one betting against a fifth. The German SPD placed behind a moderate Green Party. The French Socialists, who won the presidency in 2012, now polling at 11%. The Italian left imploded and divided. The Spanish and Swedish Socialists hanging on to power, but way below their earlier levels of support. And truth be told, no sensible Democrat, capital D, or Democrat, lowercase d, should overplay the Biden victory. He won against an incumbent like no other, considered by center ground voters to be uniquely strange and unacceptable in his behavior. In the middle of the COVID-19 crisis, Donald Trump's actions appeared to have worsened the pandemic, and even then, Trump increased his number of votes in 2020 from 2016, while the Republicans took seats in the House of Representatives and probably only lost control of the Senate thanks to the bizarre post-election antics that ended in the storming of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. The Biden victory was a heavy reaction, not so much against the policies as the comportment of Trump. Let me say that one again. The Biden victory was a heavy reaction, not so much against the policies as the comportment of Trump. And in Biden, Democrats nominated possibly the only potential leader who could have won. Without Biden and his self-evident reasonableness and moderation, there might have been no victory. Ideas matter in politics, and rightly matter a lot to progressives. But without leaders who can frame and present these ideas successfully, they gather dust on shelves, not votes in ballot boxes. Biden's manifest decency, right person, right place, right time, turned out to be vital. Even now, however, with the new president on a roll, his understated manner belying an extraordinarily radical stimulus and build back program, the Democrats will not have it all their way. It could be that the domination of the Republican Party by the continuing division over Donald Trump eclipses any opportunity for revival, at least for the presidency. But should the Republicans resolve their leadership crisis and identify a viable leader, they could give the Democrats a run for their money. In particular, while Biden is battling the COVID-19 crisis, his obvious competence in an area where partisan politics is regarded as stupid serves him well. But outside of that domain, the Democrats may struggle, especially on cultural issues. America remains a deeply divided country. In short, leave to one side Joe Biden, and around today's Western world, there are only flickers of a progressive agenda with deep majority support. Now, let me go back to a key sentence. It could be that the domination of the Republican Party by the continued division over Donald Trump eclipses any opportunity for a revival, at least for the presidency. That's why the media is obsessed with Donald Trump and the GOP. They must keep the divisions going. They must keep the divisions alive. They've got to keep the Republican Party divided. Now, why? Blair gets to this problem, which is fascinating. The former British Prime Minister has a better sense of this than it seems like the American progressive movement does. The progressive problem is that in an era where people want change in a changing world and a fairer, better, and more prosperous future, the radical progressives aren't sensible, and the sensible aren't radical. The choice is therefore between those who fail to inspire hope and those who inspire as much fear as hope. So the running is made by the new radical left, with the moderates dragged along behind, uncomfortably mouthing a watered-down version of the left's policies, while occasionally trying to dig in their heels to stop further sliding towards the alienation of the center. The result is that today, progressive politics has an old-fashioned economic message of big state, tax and spend, which, other than the spending part, which the right can do anyway, is not particularly attractive. This is combined with a new-fashioned social critical message around extreme identity and anti-police politics, which for large swaths of people is voter repellent. Defund the police may be the left's most damaging political slogan since the dictatorship of the proletariat. It leaves the right with an economic message which seems more practical and a powerful cultural message around defending flag, family, and fireside traditional values. To stop it off, the right evinces a pride in their nation, while parts of the left seem embarrassed by the very notion. And then he points out that the Labour Party in Great Britain is now so radicalized to the left, it can't even welcome people like J.K. Rowling, who wrote Harry Potter, because she believes only women can have children. The radicalism of the left, Tony Blair knows, is poison. And the only way right now the media knows how to distract from the radicalism of the left is to point fingers at the GOP and say, look at those guys. Look at the division. Look at what they're doing to Liz Cheney. Look at Donald Trump calling the shots. Look at Trump still. Y'all don't like Donald Trump. Remember, you don't like him. Look at January 6th. That's what they got to do. They're pointing. Look over there. Look over there. Don't look over here. No. Don't look over here at birthing people. Don't look over here at the crazy, just the wild ideas from progressive America. antipathy and hatred, outright hatred towards Christian values, outright hatred towards cultural conservative values, hatred, disdain for the police and law enforcement, hatred for the United States, revising American history to claim it's all about and has always been about slavery, embracing the idea of systemic racism. And if you dare question them, you're a racist. You're not allowed to question them. Everything is socially constructed except for what they say. Somehow gender and race are socially constructed, but also determinative of how you're going to be in society. And don't you dare try to elevate above it, or you're going to be an Uncle Tim Scott. Notice how the media doesn't want to cover it. They're dismissive of it. Say that's not real. That's not really happening. No one really wants to defund the police. And yet prominent Democrats are constantly saying defund the police. You know, Bill de Blasio took $1 billion away from the police in New York City and has had to give $100 million back. Why? Crime wave. The Democratic Party is drifting further to the left. And here comes the former British Prime Minister, Tony Blair, who did New Labour, left popular. He's raising flags, red flags, saying, whoa, guys, you've gone back to old socialist politics of the 50s and 60s that nobody wants. People do not like their country, their flag, or their history being disrespected. The left always gets confused by the sentiment and assume this means people support everything their country has done or think all their history is sacrosanct. They don't. But they query imposing the thinking of today on the practices of yesterday. They're suspicious that behind the agenda of many of the culture warriors on the left lies an ideology they find alien and extreme. And they're instinctively brilliant at distinguishing between the sentiment and the movement. They will support strongly campaigns against racism, but they recoil from some of the language and actions of the fringes of the Black Lives Matter movement. You could go through the entire litany of modern causes and find the same, from Extinction Rebellion to trans rights to reclaim the streets in the same way. People like common sense, proportion, and reason. They dislike prejudice, but they dislike extremism in combating prejudice. They support the police and the armed forces. Again, it doesn't mean that they think those institutions are beyond reproach, not at all. But they're on their guard for those who think they can use any wrongdoing to smear the institutions themselves. And they expect their leaders to voice their own opinion, not subcontract opinion to pressure groups, no matter how worthy. The correct course for progressives on cultural issues is to make a virtue of reason and moderation. To be intolerant of intolerance, saying you can disagree without denouncing, to seek unity, to eschew gesture politics and slogans, and when they're accused of being insufficiently supportive of a cause, to stand up for themselves and make it clear they're not going to be bullied or pushed around. How long before Tony Blair is canceled for writing all that? You know they're going to come for him. Or maybe they'll just decide he's irrelevant. But look at the left right now. You've got to defund the police. The country is racist. The Constitution is illegitimate. You've got to stop eating cows and start eating bugs. Joe Biden doesn't have to embrace the ban on cows. He's got the entire American media now exerting a pressure campaign on you to give up beef. Major publications, recipe companies, they've stopped publishing recipes with beef. You've got major media outlets from Time to the Washington Post encouraging you to eat bugs in the last week. You've got a bunch of politicians out there saying we need to defund the police. The American media say, well, they don't really mean it. Pay attention to the Republicans over here. Look at those crazies. Look at those crazies. This is all what they're doing. They've got to distract the American people with Orange Man bad so that you pay no attention to the nuts on the left, led by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Nancy Pelosi, and the like. And yet they are running full bore to the left, and the American people don't like it. They do not like the education department seeding the ground with the 1619 project that claims we're all a bunch of racists, can never be not racist, and if you disagree, you're a racist. The left can't help themselves. And the media can't help them except by distracting from them and forcing everyone to look at Trump. That's why they're obsessed with Donald Trump still. That's why they're obsessed with making Donald Trump bad. That's why they're obsessed with Trump and Tucker Carlson and Ron DeSantis being antagonists, being villains, so that they can point over there and say, do you really want to be with them? Don't pay attention over here. Do you really want to be with them? Don't look over there. No, don't look over there. They're not representative of the Democratic Party. No. But Ron DeSantis, Tucker Carlson, and Donald Trump, they are the Republican Party. Do you want to be with them or somewhere over near AOC? That's what all of this is about. And Tony Blair, of all people, is the one calling them out, saying, this is going to cost you elections. You're going to lose. You've got to be rebuilt from the ground up. You've got to cede cultural ground to culturally conservative voters. They're not going to be able to do it. They find themselves dominant. They find themselves with a cultural elite running the media, telling them everything's okay. Don't pay attention to people like this. They're not going to be able to help themselves, and the result is going to be the Republicans come back. The death of the GOP keeps getting exaggerated. After Obama won, it was the death of the GOP. After 2018, it was the death of GOP. I mean, go all the way back to 2006 when Pelosi first took over the House. It was the GOP comes to an end. And then Barack Obama wins. Aha, proof! And then 2018, see? And now 2020, they're dead. They keep coming back. The media can't kill them off. The death of the Republican Party is exaggerated. Progressives will be the death of the nation, and the American public knows it, which is why they keep the GOP around.
Want to be on the show? Call Eric now at 877.
Hello there, it is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Y'all Eden Pure has decided to extend their offer one more week. You can get 3 of their Eden Pure Thunderstorm air purifiers and save $200. You get 3 of them for just $187. They are portable. You can hold them in your hand. You can put one in your kitchen, one in your bedroom, one if you got an RV, a camper, a car, put it there. Warmer weather is here, and with moisture comes the mold and the mildew and the fungus. Parts of your home start to smell a little musty from it. The Eden Pure will clean it up. The Eden Pure Thunderstorm air purifier is guaranteed to kill and prevent the spread of mold, mildew, and fungus, including black mold. You got to get one of these. They're so convenient. They're so well made. You go to EdenPureDeals.com. Eden, like the Garden of Eden. PureDeals.com. All one word, EdenPureDeals.com. And at checkout, you put in my name, Erick, E-R-I-C-K. That's your checkout code. You can get 3 Eden Pure air purifiers for $187. The regular price is $387 for 3. So you're saving $200 and shipping is free. Use it in the kitchen, get rid of the smells in the kitchen, use it in the bedroom at night, use it in your car, use it in your RV. It really works. It's really good. It's really worth it. Go to EdenPureDeals.com, put Erick in as your checkout code. You will thank me later. I'm getting emails from people thanking me for them. It's great. And it's filterless. You don't have to keep changing filters. So EdenPureDeals.com. Now, to the phones. I want to go to Todd in Macon. Todd, welcome.
Hey, buddy. I wanted to tell you, first of all, I just ordered 3 of your Eden Pure filters. And second, I just want to know, why would anybody in the world want to destroy America the way it is? The Democrats just, I just don't understand it. Man.
So, okay. So here's the thing. You and I think that we're the greatest country. Democrats, progressives, let's leave Democrats out of it because not all Democrats agree, but the progressives do. They believe that the United States is actually less good than we believe. They believe that the United States has never fully accounted for sins of racism. And they have now internalized with critical theory the idea that the United States is systemically racist. And the only way to get rid of systemic racism is to destroy the institutions that were originally founded. They believe racism is so bad in this country that you've got to tear down the institutions built by the slave-holding founding fathers in order to get rid of it. They look on Russia, they look on Europe, they look on Asian countries like China, and they actually don't see those sins there. Therefore, they decide they're better than us. And frankly, I'm convinced a lot of these groups are getting money from China and Russia. I mean, you've got the Confucius Institutes around the country and the like. I just think that a lot of this is a propaganda campaign by outside groups. I got about 30 seconds, so let me let you go there, but let me make this point on the way out the door. The Democrats want us to believe that the Russians tried to seed discord in 2016 through online groups and the like. Why can't the Russians and Chinese be seeding discord in this country by funding progressive groups that have bought into critical race theory? Why can't they? Sure seems like they are. I'd be interested to find out where the money for the environmentalist groups are coming as well. And the media, of course, doesn't want to talk about any of that. But if they can do the one, why can't they do the other? This is a deeply divisive agenda, and I think it's a very big deal we got to focus on. Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here. Glad to have you with me today. Delighted. I hope it's dry where you are because it is rainy and gloomy where I am. And my goodness, it's muggy as well. All right. The phone number, if you want to call in and be a part of the program, is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. At the bottom of this hour, Stephen Gutowski is going to join me from The Reload to talk about the NRA bankruptcy. They've been thrown out of bankruptcy court, and they're now going to be harassed by the New York Attorney General. I want to reset for you real quick before I get into what I want to talk about this hour on the fuel issue. Colonial Pipeline says it will, by this evening, to make the determination of whether or not it can restore the lines and get it up and going. This is the first time the pipeline has ever been shut down, and they want to take some precautions before they get it starting. They don't want a chain of events that causes more problems. I will tell you that gas shortages are happening across the Southeast. It was interesting. Yesterday, the New York Times, shortly before noon, declared that there were no gas shortages anywhere, and yet gas shortages were happening. My guess is that they ran the story Sunday night and pushed it out Monday morning on social media, and things changed. But gas shortages are starting to happen throughout the Southeast. They began in South Carolina, and they've spread it. In Georgia, the governor has suspended the state gas tax. He's allowed to. In other states, they are not unilaterally allowed to suspend the gas tax, but the governor in Georgia is, so he did. Gas prices have risen, and supply has been affected across the Southeast. Gas Buddy, if you want to find where you can get gas, go to gasbuddy.com or get their app. Gas Buddy has an app that shows fuel availability for 7 states: Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, South Carolina, North Carolina, Florida, Virginia, and Maryland. You can go into the app, use your location, and find the nearest gas station that still has available fuel reserves. We will find out later today, again, sometime around 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Colonial will decide whether or not they're able to reopen the pipeline. If they reopen the pipeline, it will take days to restore the flow. Now, why? Well, a couple reasons. Getting reserves back up to date, but also they will have to get it on trucks to get it to gas stations. And thanks to the Biden administration subsidizing unemployment, there is a shortage of tanker drivers, certified tanker drivers, to be able to drive the fuel trucks. So the Biden unemployment benefit is compounding the issue. Now, speaking of the unemployment benefit, Democrats are beginning to turn on the unemployment benefit. They're not quite happy with the unemployment benefit out there right now, and they are increasingly unwilling to recognize publicly that it's causing problems, but behind the scenes, they're starting to grumble about it. Here's Chipotle's chief restaurant officer on television talking about this unemployment benefit.
I think there are a number of reasons. I think first and foremost, people are concerned about child care today as well as their own personal health. And so I think that's keeping people out of the workforce. Anecdotally, we're also hearing that folks just aren't ready to return to work just yet, as robust stimulus packages as well as unemployment benefits have been very strong over the past few months and will continue to be so through the summer. And so I think folks are taking the opportunity to protect themselves, protect their families, take care of their children. And for us and we have a reemerging economy. So as many businesses are reopening, there's a need for more talent. And there are plenty of jobs across the U.S. today for folks who are ready to get back to work.
Let me follow up on something you just mentioned, because we have heard from some Republican governors in particular and other business owners, what you also mentioned, the extra federal unemployment assistance for the worker shortage, and they're blaming that for the worker shortage. At least a half dozen states now have announced that they're going to end those benefits before they expire. Is that the right move?
I certainly believe so. I think it encourages folks to get back to work. There are a number of jobs available across all industry today. And for us to continue to grow the economy here in the U.S., we've got to have people ready and willing to engage, get back to work, and continue to drive the economy.
What? They're going to cancel him for saying that. But behind the scenes, Democrats are beginning to grumble about it as well. Joe Manchin is already making clear he's not going to support an extension past September 6th, but it's not just him. Ron Wyden, the chair of the Senate Finance Committee, said that though it is not accurate, the benefits discourage work, he doesn't think there will be a need. And Gene Shaheen of New Hampshire says that the unemployment rate in New Hampshire is pretty low. There's no reason to continue it. Tim Kaine of Virginia says he's open to changing the benefit, but that he doesn't think it'll happen. John Tester of Montana says he thinks it's right for states to waive it. Georgia looks like it's going to become the next state to waive the unemployment benefit. You've now got Montana, South Carolina, Arkansas, Alabama, Tennessee this morning waived it. Georgia's expected. Florida, Ron DeSantis said he's looking into legally, does he have the power to do it? He's going to do it. There are all sorts of problems for the Democrats if they continue to do this, on top of everything else that's happening. The inflation number today is actually a pretty big deal. The inflation number today, it's the highest rise in inflation since April of 1982. It's the highest increase in used cars, a 10% increase in the cost of new cars, the highest increase since 1953. Now, part of that problem, a friend tells me, is the chip shortage that's out there is causing people to go for used cars instead of new cars, among other reasons, also adding cost to it. But also, people have a lot of disposable income thanks to the government stimulus, and they're spending it. Lots of problems out there for the Biden administration right now. And also, the media is finally turning on the CDC and the Biden administration over their continued use of masks. Chris Cuomo on CNN. Now, he's struggling for ratings. You should know CNN's ratings have been in free fall. 2/3 of Chris Cuomo's audience has abandoned him now. And now he's finally decided to go after the CDC.
Facts matter. Truth matters. And that means that you don't cover for an agency just because it's under attack by people who are trying to push lies. You got to keep it straight. As this, the New York Times reporting that the CDC's numbers on the risk of catching COVID outdoors are misleading at best. What does that mean? Well, we've been working on the assumption that, quote, less than 10% of transmission happens outdoors. However, it is just as likely that the transmission percentage is less than 1%. Why? Why didn't they update it? Is this about them big brothering us and trying to keep it safe for longer? I could understand it, but it's not honest. Remember, it also took them months to update the guidance telling us COVID is airborne. Remember aerosolization, the word we all had to learn how to say? And that it wasn't all about wiping down surfaces. Now, look, I know that all of us still live in an environment where all these new helpful people cleaning everything off, everything's getting cleaned all the time. But now the guidance is that that's not really what it's about. Guidance for summer camps and masking. I submit to you, playing it too cautious and confusing. Look, better than lying about the risk. And I know this is dangerous to do because you got the other side trying to pretend that there is no risk. That is the danger. But we have to play it straight.
It's hilarious to essentially have Chris Cuomo say, the other side, they're terrible people, but they're right. That's essentially what he's arguing. Here's Senator Susan Collins of Maine with the CDC director on the teachers issue.
So here we have unnecessary barriers to reopening schools, exaggerating the risks of outdoor transmission, and unworkable restrictions on summer camps. Why does this matter? It matters because it undermines public confidence in your recommendations, in the recommendations that do make sense, in the recommendations that Americans should be following. I'd like you to respond to why the CDC is not following the standard procedures, why it's having offline secret negotiations with one stakeholder that was revealed only through reporting and a FOIA request, why it is exaggerating outdoor transmission. We know that masks make a big difference indoors. They don't outdoors.
Oof. She's not happy. She's not happy. And you know who else is upset? CNN's medical analyst is upset with Joe Biden now.
So President Biden heard from some Republican governors today who complained about the messaging when it comes to what vaccinated people can do. You and I are both vaccinated. You and I are sitting here in a studio. I'll ask you what I asked Jeff Zients, the COVID coordinator for the White House. Why is President Biden wearing a mask in a room full of vaccinated people? Isn't this discouraging people from seeing the light at the end of the tunnel? I can finally have guests on the set.
Yeah, and it's good to be here. Look, I think it's the wrong message. It's confusing people. There was just a study today that was published out of the Cleveland Clinic. They looked at 47,000 of their employees and looked at the incidence of hospitalization from January through the middle of April. And what they found is that of the people who were hospitalized with COVID-19 who worked for the Cleveland Clinic, 99.75% were not completely vaccinated. Said in another way, only 0.25% of people, that's 2.5 out of 1,000 who were hospitalized for COVID-19 had received both vaccines. So the message really needs to be that the vaccines work. And if two people, like we're sitting here, are vaccinated, there is no risk to either one of us. There's even less risk out in public. So what the administration really should be doing is, instead of continuing to hawk the message of masks in public, they should be hawking the message that vaccines are incredibly effective and vaccines work. So if you're completely vaccinated, you're 2 weeks after either your second vaccination or 2 weeks after the single J&J shot, go out and about. You don't need a mask.
Go out and about. You don't need a mask. That should be the message. Go back to your life. Get the vaccine and go back to your life. That should be the message. That should be what they've been saying, but they haven't been saying that. Joe Biden still appears in public wearing a mask, and he doesn't need to wear a mask. The CDC is causing people to question the legitimacy of the data. When you go back to the Chris Cuomo statement, now you all know I'm doing two shows right now, and I can't remember which show I talk about something on and which I didn't. I don't think I talked about this here yesterday, and I meant to. The New York Times did a deep dive on the CDC data saying less than 10% of COVID cases come from outside. It's actually 96 cases. 96 cases in a study in Singapore out of 10,000 cases. 96 were outside, and then weren't even outside. That's the crazy thing, is when you actually dive into the data, what you find in Singapore is that 96 cases originated on a construction site. And the CDC said, well, since it was a construction site, they listed it as outside. So there were 96 cases that did occur outside, according to the CDC, at a construction site. But the reporters at the New York Times actually did a dive into the location, and it turns out that they were on the interior of a windowless building with limited airflow. It was construction workers working on the inside of a building. The four walls and roof were already on the building. They were putting in the windows. So it was actually inside. There was some airflow due to the windows, but that's what it was. So it wasn't technically outside, and that's where it spread. There are otherwise zero instances anyone can find of COVID spreading outdoors. When you actually look into the data, there was a separate Swiss study other than the Singaporean study, and it too found the same thing at construction sites inside buildings that were being built. They were framed, in many cases had walls, and that's where COVID spread at construction sites. But they can't find anybody at the beach getting it. They can't find anybody outside running getting it. They can't find any of this. And yet there are some governments out there, some local governments in this country, that are still enforcing outdoor mask mandates because it makes them feel good about themselves. It makes them feel virtuous. And when they substitute virtue for science, they undermine their claims for everyone and cast doubt on the whole legitimacy of the enterprise and allow the conspiracy theorists to fire up about it. It's ridiculous that they're doing it, but here we are in America, the left, feeling virtuous by ignoring the science while calling the rest of us anti-science.
News and in-depth analysis.
Hello. How are you? It is Erick Erickson. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. You know, I got an idea, and I floated this on the other show, too. You know, I'm in Macon, and I just think those of us in Middle Georgia ought to, at some point, we ought to all get together and go to a local brewery in Middle Georgia somewhere and have like a ceremonial mask burning, that the world is back to normal. We don't have to wear our masks anymore. I think it'd be a great idea. I've been targeting it up on my Atlanta show and want to do it. And there's so many great places in Middle Georgia, great little breweries that I'm discovering. My favorite is Fall Line. It's in downtown Macon. I'm like a lager pilsner. I don't like IPAs that much, but they've got this great. The Fall Line lager is fantastic. Got some in my fridge, as a matter of fact. And go burn our masks and have the world go back to normal. I just think it's something we should do. We'll see. In any event, right now I need to tell you that the world is going back to normal, and you're going to want to start having friends over, and you're going to want to grill out. And Omaha Steaks wants to help you. Memorial Day is going to be here in just a couple of weeks. So what you're going to want to do is go to omahasteaks.com and put Georgia in the search bar. And when you do it, you'll see the Let's Go Grill pack. You'll get $20 off your first order. You're going to get 12 burgers for free. Think of the friends you can have over grilling up 12 Omaha steak burgers. They're not your standard ground chuck fare. They're Omaha steak burgers. And you'll get steaks, you'll get chicken breasts, you'll get pork chops, you'll get sausages, you'll get caramel apple tartlets, you'll get scalloped potatoes. You can get so much. You can go grill with your friends, the Let's Go Grill pack from Omaha Steaks. You go to omahasteaks.com, you put Georgia in the search bar. If you're on mobile, you'll see the magnifying glass. Click it and put in Georgia, and you will see my name pop up, the network show. Click it and get the Let's Go Grill package. $20 off first order from Omaha Steaks. You get 12 burgers for free. They're delicious steak burgers from Omaha Steaks. And you get steak, you get chicken, you get pork chops, and you can buy so much more at Omaha Steaks. You don't just have to get the package. Add to it. I get the pre-sliced up chicken breast for meal prep, and it comes in so handy. It's chicken breast. They're sealed, they're frozen, but they're already cut up for you. You can let them thaw a little bit, throw them in a skillet, get them going, throw a good rub on them. In fact, you get signature seasoning from Omaha Steaks. You can use that. You get that in the Let's Go Grill pack. So go to omahasteaks.com today, put Georgia in the search bar, and let's go grill for Memorial Day and have some good food. The world really is getting back to normal. What's not normal is the left losing their minds. I just got this email from Chris Rufo. You know, I talked about yesterday, Disney has gone woke, and they've got their diversity and inclusion program that is actually telling white employees of Disney that they are inherently racist. And now multiple people are telling Chris, and wanted to pass this along, Disney has completely removed its diversity and inclusion program from the company's website, scrubbing it out of existence. This is a major victory in the war against woke capital. Disney was peddling the most toxic elements of critical race theory, and my reporting led to immediate changes within the company. The truth is simple. Corporate diversity and inclusion is a scam. It's a reputation laundering mechanism for corporations and divides Americans into competing racial categories. Shut it all down. Yet, listen, there is no reason for companies to have diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. There's no reason that companies should force employees to go to diversity programs where they tell the white employees they're inherently a bunch of racists. But that's what they're doing. They're hiring a bunch of con artists to shake down the Fortune 500. And, if you don't do it, they come after you. But, the way you fight the wokes is to not give in to the wokes. Now, the reality, though, is that a lot of the Fortune 500, they've been infested with the wokes. And the wokes have taken over legal departments, human resources departments. The amount of diversity, equity, and inclusion nonsense I get from people these days passing it along is just absolutely ridiculous. And yet that's what they're doing. And it makes the corporate leaders feel virtuous in what they're doing when they're basically telling their employees they're all a bunch of racists. And by the way, the wokes within the company grab hold of it and demand changes. It's fascinating to watch this rebellion happening on the left. Welcome back. It is Erick Erickson here, the Erick Erickson Show across the nation. The phone number 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. If you go to thereload.com, the top headline right now, NRA Hail Mary flops as bankruptcy dismissed. Joining me to discuss it is the proprietor and writer at thereload.com himself, Stephen Gutowski. Welcome. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing good. How are you, Eric?
I'm great. All right. So if you wouldn't mind, let's go back to the very beginning. You talk about this in the piece at the Reload. Why did the NRA file for bankruptcy to begin with?
Well, basically, it all comes down to the New York Attorney General's suit, which seeks to dissolve the group over accusations of, well, tens of millions of dollars worth of financial impropriety over decades by executives like Wayne LaPierre. And apparently he and outside counsel Bill Brewer thought that this bankruptcy gambit would be their best chance of counteracting that suit.
So you get into bankruptcy, and bankruptcy pretty much forestalls claims against an organization and litigation against an organization. So they jump in to do that, and then they move their headquarters while in bankruptcy to Texas. And now the court has thrown out the bankruptcy, and you write, this is your quote in the ruling, that the court agrees with the New York Attorney General that the NRA is using this bankruptcy case to address a regulatory enforcement problem, not a financial one.
Yeah, that's right. Essentially, the court determined that the bankruptcy was filed in bad faith because essentially the NRA didn't have a financial problem. Their finances are stable for now, at least, in the sense that they have more assets than they have liabilities. And so namely, they were trying to use bankruptcy to prevent one of the possible punishments in this New York case, the dissolution. And so he said, you can't do that. You can't use bankruptcy to escape prosecution in a state.
Yeah, and so now the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, when she's not dealing with the Andrew Cuomo investigation, has decided she's going to go after the NRA, and she's signaling that she's going to move forward with her investigation.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it was her argument in court that this should be dismissed because, she said this is an inappropriate way to try and escape my prosecution. I want to move forward with this prosecution in state court because that's the proper venue for all of this fight to happen in, instead of in federal bankruptcy court in Texas. And well, she won. She convinced the judge.
So, I mean, where does this go from here with her in particular? Because it seems like, based on what I know thus far, and largely through your reporting, there are some financial issues with the NRA, self-dealing and using NRA money for personal transactions that really could cause problems for the organization, it seems like.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the NRA had to admit to a lot of that in this bankruptcy court in the trial, that basically, it did do a lot of things that their own lawyers called cringeworthy. Like Wayne LaPierre has admitted himself to taking more than $300,000 worth of excess benefits, basically spending NRA money on personal expenses. Now, the Attorney General accuses him of taking, millions more than that, but certainly the group has admitted to a number of problems. Their argument in court was that they had already fixed all those problems, and of course the Attorney General and other parties in the case said that they hadn't actually fixed the problems. Wayne LaPierre is still there, Bill Brewer is still in charge of their legal strategy, and so it's going to be now a fight in New York court, basically. James said yesterday that she's going to take up this case starting next year. It'll probably take another year or two to get to a final outcome with all the appeal paths that are available, which was one of the points in this case. Like, there's other legal venues for the NRA to fight the New York case in outside of bankruptcy. So that was one of the reasons the judge didn't grant them what they wanted.
So, where do you see the NRA going from here? They've moved corporate headquarters to Texas, although they're really headquartered in Virginia, and they're not moving that, just their corporate structure moving to Texas. But, I mean, it seems like we've got an organization, at least from my vantage point, that there are some problems within the NRA. You had the Oliver North situation, which is still kind of weird to me, but the NRA board kind of doubled down in defense of existing operations. But the more that trickles out, it seems like they got problems and maybe they're not necessarily doing everything they should do.
Yeah. Well, one, they're actually not moving to Texas now because that was part of this bankruptcy play. They wanted to move their charter from New York to Texas to basically avoid this, or at least reposition this case in New York. So that's out the window now. They're still chartered in New York. But, yeah, I mean, as far as where they go from here, you know, the board, most of the board doesn't participate in a lot of what goes on at the NRA. So only about, I believe, 60% of the board showed up for the last two emergency hearings on this bankruptcy. So gives you some indication to how active a lot of these board members are. And then most of the ones that do show up are fully supportive of leadership, of Wayne LaPierre and Brewer. And so it's hard to imagine that changing anytime soon. So, you know, it seems like their next steps are just to try and fight this case in New York. And, I mean, they filed bankruptcy to try and avoid fighting the case in New York. So probably that in and of itself gives you some indication as to what they think their chances of winning are, I would imagine.
Yeah, that's kind of was my conclusion, that if you're willing to go so far as to file bankruptcy to try to avoid a case, you probably are thinking this case is bad for you. So let's step back a little bit beyond the NRA. The state of play in the Second Amendment, the Democrats, they're not going to get rid of the filibuster. They can't really enact major gun control right now. Maybe if they can take the Senate, but they're probably going to lose the House in the process. But where do you see the gun rights movement in the country going? There are a number of other groups out there. The NRA seems distracted right now, and Chris Cox, I guess, is left now, and he's doing something. What's the overview of Second Amendment groups out there defending the Second Amendment that have a political capital like the NRA has had?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I think the biggest risk here is that the NRA really could go away. If Letitia James gets what she wants, there would not be an NRA anymore. And then the question is, what happens after that? And, the NRA isn't the gun rights movement, right? There will be a gun rights movement, even if there isn't an NRA. That's one thing that's for sure. And I think eventually that other groups would come up to replace the different functions of the NRA. But I don't want to undersell how much of an impact that could have in the short term. Because the NRA, for whatever you think of its faults or its leadership or whatever criticisms people have of it from the gun rights, side of things, it does a lot of work. It's a big organization. It's $400 million. It's almost 5 million members at this point. And that's no small thing. You can only become a member of the NRA if you pay them money. So it's very different from like every town claims to have 5 million members, but they just mean a 5 million member email list,
right?
Not people paying them money. That's a very different thing. And so they do, not only do they do lobbying probably at a higher level than anyone else as an individual organization, they do training on a national scale, unlike any other organization. They do political advocacy on a national scale, unlike any other organization. So that these things are not going to be replaced the next day if the NRA were to go away.
Right.
And it's going to take time. Now, the good news is, one, there are lots of other strong, gun rights organizations out there, from, Second Amendment Foundations, the Firearms Policy Coalition, or there's Gun Owners of America. There's a million at the state level that are very good, probably more influential than the NRA at the state level. Oftentimes, like in Virginia, we have VCDL, the Virginia Citizens Defense League. You've got Georgia Carry down there in Georgia. There's tons of organizations like that can pick up the slack at the state level. And then you have the National Shooting Sports Foundation, which does lobbying on behalf of the industry. itself. And so, like, there are alternatives. It's just realistically, you're not going to have the NRA go away and then overnight all the slack's going to get picked up. It'll get picked up eventually.
Yeah.
And then on the same front, there is optimism, I think, regardless of what happens with the NRA, in the fact that there's so many new gun owners and that we've seen a number of them already turn into new gun rights activists. I profiled a couple of them at the Reload. I just recently wrote about Guns Out TV, this show by these two black gun owners, Shermichael Singleton and John Keyes. And John Keyes just became a gun owner for the first time last year. And he's already doing basically advocacy to try and, bring more people into the gun owning community.
Well, that is encouraging. I always say that you bring somebody into as gun owners and they seem to almost become conservatives or at least move to the right on these issues, which is helpful. Now, next steps, I guess, how do you see this playing out? I assume it goes back now and Letitia James can rev up her case in New York.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There'll be a period of time here where, like, in theory, the NRA could appeal this decision, or they could even refile the case. But from what I've seen from Adam Levinson, who's a bankruptcy expert professor at Georgetown, the initial reaction seems to be that they are unlikely to do that because it's not likely to succeed. And then what the NRA put out yesterday, they specifically talk about going back to fight in New York. So doesn't sound like they're going to, try to pursue bankruptcy anymore. I reached out for more comment from them, but haven't heard back yet. And then, they'll have to fight in New York. It'll probably take a couple years to get through all of that litigation. And then, there's always possibility that, what Letitia James wants is very radical. Mm-hmm. There's never been a case in the history of the country where a group the size of the NRA was completely dismantled over accusations of, financial impropriety by their leadership.
Right.
That's never happened. And so it's a big ask, and she has to convince a judge to do that, and probably several judges, because I'm sure the NRA, if that ruling came down, would probably appeal it.
Yeah.
So it's not a absolute certainty that that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And you could see some sort of lesser punishment instead.
And it would be a long way off, even if it did with appeals and everything else. So it's got some time, I guess. Hopefully it'll start trying to clean up its house as well, more than it has. Stephen, listen, it's always a pleasure to talk to you and super informative. Folks can go to thereload.com to find out more. I am subscribing now, and it's great content. So I appreciate you stopping by as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Stephen Gutowski, thereload.com. And again, NRA Hail Mary flops as bankruptcy dismissed. And now the state of New York will go after them. They genuinely, I think, need to clean up in ways they have not. The leadership has doubled down in defense of Wayne LaPierre, and just so much has already come out. I don't think that that's sustainable. It's going to have a real impact on the nation's largest gun owners organization at a time Democrats are revving up more gun control options. But silver lining, as Stephen points out, is we got a whole lot of new gun owners in this country, and they're not going to want to have their guns taken away.
I really do like his opinion on it.
Hi there. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number, 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Y'all heard about this story, credit card balances. Banks and credit card companies are not happy because people are paying off their credit cards at a very rapid rate. The Wall Street Journal, among others, let me pull back up the story. I had it pulled up and then closed it out earlier. The banks are worried about the financial impact of people not being in debt. Large card issuers that cater to borrowers ranging from the affluent to the subprime say that overall card balances and thus the firm's interest income are falling. To make up for it, issuers are spending more on marketing and loosening their underwriting standards, which will probably cause a crisis later. Discover Financial Services said on its earnings call last month that the share of card balances that were paid off at the end of the first quarter was the highest since 2000. Capital One said nearly half of the credit card balances it had at the beginning of March were paid off by the end of the month, which the company described as historically high. The company's calculations are based on the credit card balances that they packaged into securities and sold to investors. Synchrony Financial, the largest issuer of store credit cards in the U.S., said payment rates have been higher than they averaged before the pandemic. Card balances at the three companies were down 9%, 17%, and 7% in the first quarter for the year prior, respectively. The results reflect the pandemic's topsy-turvy effects on consumer finances. A year ago, lenders expected delinquencies to surge and many borrowers to turn to credit cards to make ends meet. But then the government stepped in, issued stimulus checks, expanded unemployment benefits, and made it easier for borrowers to pause payments and pay off loans. And, you know, there's always kind of a warning sign, I think, psychologically, that something is coming, that the public combined knows something bad is coming when the public combined is paying off their credit cards. I've been paying off mine. Now, I've gotten down, I've got a balance on 2 cards, but I've paid them off each month. I just have some small recurring expenses that I put on them. But, you know, the absurdity of this is that you almost have to have credit cards now. The entire banking system is now designed for you to have to get credit cards. Because if you want a mortgage, how are mortgage lenders supposed to assess you if you don't get a credit card? This is the most absurd thing to me. I cannot tell you the number of people I know, including Philip works for me. He won't mind me saying that. He is just super disciplined in his finance. Super disciplined. I'm actually really jealous with the people who are that disciplined in their financing and budgeting and financial decisions and how they handle their money and not getting credit cards. And then you go out and you want to apply for a mortgage, and the mortgage companies are like, well, you're not fiscally reckless, so we can't give you a mortgage because we can't determine how fiscally reckless you might be because you're not fiscally reckless. So you've got to take out loans and credit cards to be able to get a good credit score, to be able to get a good mortgage, and you do that by indebting yourself to banks. The whole system is a scam. Now, look, I get why they do it. The best way to assess how someone is going to pay off a mortgage is how are they paying off their other debts. But it does seem to me that when you have someone who is deeply fiscally responsible, who never incurs debt to begin with and decides to buy a house, that should be a pretty big green light that, you know, give this person a mortgage because they're not going to default. And yet they don't do that. They want people with a ton of credit cards. And then God help you when you go out and you do this. I was listening to a buddy of mine the other day talking about this, that he and his wife had one credit card, and the only reason they got it was to apply for their mortgage. And they paid it off every month. They did not carry balances, and their mortgage company didn't want to give them the mortgage because they had one credit card and they never kept a balance on it. They hardly ever used it. And so they says, well, should we go get more credit cards? They're like, good Lord, no, man. Are you nuts? You're applying for a mortgage. Don't go get one now. So you're supposed to do it before you go. The whole system is unfriendly and punishes people who are the most fiscally disciplined. Nowadays, though, you know, you can get credit cards that are tied to your bank account. So you've got a limit on the account based on what's in your checking account, and it still builds your credit up and shows you regularly paying off your bills. But the whole system, I think, is designed to penalize people who are debt adverse and who live their lives in such a way as to not accumulate debt. And that just strikes me as wrong. I mean, for example, let's go back to this Wall Street Journal story that to make up for people paying off their credit cards, they're going to loosen their underwriting standards so people who otherwise may not be able to get credit cards can get credit cards. And what happens when you give it to the people who shouldn't be getting credit cards so that you can make money off of them right now? You're going to have a moral hazard where your credit card companies are going to go into a lot of bad debts with people who can't pay them off when the next fiscal collapse comes, and then they're going to demand a government bailout. And why won't the government bail them out? After all, the government always bails them out and creates a moral panic on these issues. I'm just not sure this is stable long term. In fact, it's not a matter of me not being sure. I am sure it's not stable long term. And I really don't like the fact that we have a credit system in this country that actually penalizes the most responsible people in the country who don't get credit cards and live their life paying all of their bills with cash. I realize it's an archaic concept at this point, but those are the people who are propping up the whole system for the rest of us who aren't fiscally disciplined. And they're the bad guys for the banks. And they're the bad guys for the credit card companies. And the credit card companies, you know, again, I just think when the entire country is moving as a herd in a direction in something like this, and it's unspoken and we're all doing it, it's probably something we recognize internally is coming bad. When everyone's rushing to pay off their cards, we know something's bad is coming. And maybe we should all be paying attention to that.